Uh, Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Christian Concern live stream. It's great to have you all join in with us again. My name's Ben John. I work for Christian Concern on our Wilberforce Academy, which is our training and equipping program for students and young professionals in the areas of cultural apologetics and Christian worldview. It's been great having these weekly live streams where we've been able to engage with our supporters, talk to you, hear about some of your questions, your concerns, and really engage with some of the key issues facing Christians in society today. Please do comment about where you are. I'm joining from Hertfordshire. Would love to just see, tell us where you are and where you're tuning in from. It's been amazing seeing every week the kind of global scope that these live streams have been getting, which has been hugely encouraging for us. Hi, Daniel Jennings. Great to have you with us. And great to really just have you all. Do not forget, please do put in your comments and your questions throughout. We don't want this to be a conversation just amongst us. We really want to be engaging with you guys. And this is really an amazing opportunity to be doing that, particularly regarding the issues that we're going to be dealing with today. We're hoping to look at the question about the churches reopening. We know that since July, the churches have been open, but there's still a lot of confusion about what can churches do? And these kinds of questions. We'll also be looking a little bit about euthanasia and the push there. Hi, Matt Timms from Newquay, Cornwall. Great to have you with us. Hi, John Winlow, Sally Richardson. So great having you join us today. It's always great having you and engaging with you. Hi, Nigel, as well. There. I'm delighted to introduce today my two colleagues from the Christian Legal Centre, Rob Smith and Roger Kiska, who will be joining us today. Hi, Rob. Hi, Roger. How are you both doing?
Well, I'm absolutely fine. I can't speak to Rog.
Well, I'm good as well, and I do appreciate the fact that your earbuds match your glasses as well, Ben.
Yeah, well spotted.
And of course, Ben, it's worthy of note that I'm being broadcast from another of the home counties in Essex, whereas Roger's coming in internationally.
I know. Yes, it's great. That's the blessing of technology. We give God thanks for that. I mean, 10 years ago we wouldn't have been able to do this. Even 5 years ago, probably not sure. But yes, great to have you all in. Hi, Steve. Hi, Lydia, Cecilia, Lydia, and John again. It's great to have you all with us. So the church has reopened. They've been allowed to be reopened since July the 4th. But obviously some churches aren't open. The government have issued lots of guidance about what churches should be doing during lockdown, how services should be run, how worship services should be run. But many churches still aren't opening. Rob, could you maybe give a high level overview about what the government have said and why maybe do you think churches aren't reopening?
Okay, well, the whole situation obviously stems back to when the outbreak of the coronavirus happened, and there was the lockdown back in March, and there was a blanket prohibition on church services came into force at that time. At Christian Legal Centre, we were fairly upset about that and considered it to actually be quite unconstitutional that the government could take such a step, particularly rendering church on a par with lower than DIY shops and that sort of thing. So the reopening of churches came further down the list even than the DIY shop. And we thought all the time that church really was a key worker service. It's a very, very important function for society generally. And so being closed like that, we thought was very high-handed. And along with a number of fairly high-profile clergy, we assisted in judicially reviewing the government's decision to actually close churches. I was particularly dismayed by the Church of England telling its own clergy that they couldn't even go into their church to do their broadcasts to their congregations, and with the Archbishop of Canterbury doing his Easter address from his own kitchen. That seems to me to be utterly bizarre. But as a consequence of the judicial review and some of the pressure that was brought to government, it was recognised that churches can reopen. And on the 4th of July, they issued guidance for the safe use of places of worship. So by virtue of the fact that the government has issued this guidance, it is obviously safe, providing that the relevant safeguards are put in place, for churches to reopen. And I've been quite dismayed by the reluctance of so many churches to reopen. And in fact, in some Christian circles, you'd almost think that the guidance which the government has issued is 101 good reasons not to reopen your church, rather than guidance for the safe reopening. And so it's on that basis that we've really been challenging this whole thing along the way and encouraging churches to do all they can to open safely.
But Rob, so I imagine there's probably churches, church leaders who are saying, you know, they see all of this government guidance and they think we can't possibly do all of that guidance. So what we'll do is we'll wait until we reopen. What would you say there?
Well, I would say to anybody in that situation that actually, if you read the guidance, if you take the trouble to see what it says, it isn't rocket science to get your place of worship reopened. One of the requirements that the government expects you to do is to compile a risk assessment. Now, a risk assessment, once again, is not a particularly complicated document. What it expects you to do is just to take a good look at your building and to take an analysis of, okay, well, where are the points likely to be where, if somebody in the congregation does have coronavirus, where is it likely to be passed on? And there are some just fairly routine housekeeping matters that can go an awful long way to reducing the spread. Now, within the regulations, there are a mixture of musts and shoulds. The musts are mandatory. So when you go into church, the church is expected to ensure that the congregation is socially distanced. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean to say that members of the same family have to be socially distanced from one another. They can sit as a group, but individual groups of people have to be separated out by preferably the 2-meter distancing. Now, if your church can accommodate that, then you can reopen pretty easily. It's not that difficult to set it out. If you've got more than one entrance to your church, set up a one-way system. These are just practical steps, how you can get a flow of people in and out of your building without really increasing the risk of anybody catching anything. So a little bit of common sense. It's going to take a little bit of effort, of course it is. But if we want our places of worship to open, we can do it.
Yeah, I think please do, everyone tuning in, write in your comments, write in your questions. I mean, this is a really great opportunity for you. If you have questions about what churches can and can't do, now is a really great time for you to just send in your questions. So please do write those in. Roger, why is this such an important issue? Why is it important that we speak and we contend on this? Why was it important that we submit the judicial review, which we did receive a lot of criticism for?
Well, I don't think that the criticism was particularly warranted. The law was on our side in the sense that when a government makes restrictions to close churches, there has to be several factors that are met. One is a rationality test, which we felt wasn't met because some of the regulations were paternalistic. They didn't pass the rationality test. This is going to be the way it is because we say so. And that's not a constitutional way to run a country. The second is that a blanket ban on something where you could have less proportionate and intrusive means to limiting religious freedom and the freedom of worship, those weren't even proposed at the time. And so you were saying, okay, you can open up and give blood and do these things which we deem are worthy and have as many people as you want attend to those, but you can't have a church service. So that right there, that's an irrational idea. You can do funerals, but not weddings. In a country where we've got more than half of our kids being born outside of wedlock nowadays, to be saying that is remarkable. We need a healthy marriage culture, not one where we're not even allowed to get married.
And they brought in no-fault divorce during lockdown.
Yeah, so there's a plethora of reasons why we felt that, among them, the obvious ones, as Rob alluded to, is that this is an essential service, that people are lingering at home with depression, with addiction, needing community, needing spiritual fellowship and not getting it. And people were suffering as a result of that. So being able to have fellowship again, to get that pastoral advice, to be there in person, it's invaluable.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, a friend of the Christian Concern, Elijah Israel Chanak. Hello, Elijah. Good to see you. He writes, a large part of church is fellowship, so I struggle to see how we can have socially distanced gatherings. And I guess, Roger, your point there about, people who are lonely, isolated, and these kinds of issues, I guess the response would be people saying, well, I guess people can visit one another, or people can pick up the phone and call one another now. What would maybe be the response to that? Maybe Roger or Rob?
Well, I mean, from my perspective the case law from the European Court of Human Rights is clear that there's something about worship which is transcendent. Freedom of religion is the only human right that recognizes the God. And so the process of worship is not just fellowship. There is a spiritual element that's viewed as sacred by those who adhere to it. And fellowship mixed with worship doesn't happen through an internet connection. Although more people may be watching, it's not the fellowship that everyone desires or needs. And to me, it's not biblical fellowship.
Yeah. And Emmanuel Apiafi, apologies for mispronunciation there. Is there any number restrictions for church services to hold? Rob, I'm sure you would know this. So is there any restrictions on the number of people they're allowed in the church buildings?
Well, the very simple answer to that is, as a numerical cap, no. However, the limit on the number of people that will be allowed to enter the church and worship will be determined by the number of people that can be fitted in whilst socially distancing. So although there is no cap, it will be determined by the number of people you can fit in socially distancing. So for instance, a cathedral will obviously have a significantly higher capacity for people while socially distancing than a small chapel would. So that is going to be the determining factor. But as far as a numerical cap, no, there is no such limit. Okay.
And I think one area of contention that there's been for many during this time has been the issue about the singing. Could you confirm on the singing point? You made that distinction between should and must. You're saying it should not sing, therefore it's not necessarily legally binding.
That's absolutely correct. The guidance is very clear. It suggests that people should not sing, but it hasn't made it a mandatory requirement. So you can't be arrested or fined or anything like that for singing, and that's just not possible. Now, when looked at in the round, there's a recommendation there, and the recommendation is there for a reason. So the fact that we can sing doesn't mean to say that we should all just carry on worshipping in exactly the same way that we always did. Technically, that could be deemed to be a little bit irresponsible. So once again, it's one of those situations where you have to look at your own congregation and say, right, okay, well, are they reasonably spaced out in the church? If singing is a really integral part of your worship, I've heard of some churches who've said, right, okay, well, if we're going to maintain the social distancing and we're going to sing, what we actually need to do is schedule in an extra service, so that everybody who wants to come and sing can come and sing, but can be socially distanced. I think the thing that has really come out of both the regulations and the coronavirus itself is how we can be so much more innovative in the way that we do church. I think you said a moment ago that Matt Timms is on. Obviously, Matt did his fantastic drive-in church down in Cornwall. This is brilliant. These are the sorts of things that we can do to make sure that fellowship is maintained and the church still happens. It isn't the same. Roger's already said it. It isn't the same doing it over Zoom or watching a YouTube clip or something like that. We do need to meet together. It's biblical, and that's what we should be doing. So there are shoulds, there are musts in the regulations. The singing is a should not rather than a must not. But done properly, we can still sing in church.
Yeah. Well, Disciple AJ writes, this is wrong. You're all being trapped by the framework of legality created by man. The world does not tell the church what to do. I think that was one of the key messages we were saying with our judicial review, was that it was an encroachment in the authority of the church. The state doesn't have the authority to regulate worship. And of course, we welcome advice, we welcome guidance, but it doesn't have the authority to criminalize public worship. Please do, if you have any more questions, please do add them in. This is really helpful. I'm sure it's helpful for me as well to be thinking and wrestling with these kinds of issues. Roger, that question about the state sort of dictating to the church what they should be doing, even under the grounds of health and safety, is problematic. What would you say to this?
Well, it's problematic, but it's not an unfettered right in the sense that the government does have the ability to put some restrictions on religious exercise so long as they serve a legitimate aim, and those aims are enumerated in Article 9 of the European Convention. One of them being public health. But it has to be deemed to be necessary in a democratic society, meaning that if there are more narrowly tailored ways to do things without interfering as much with the right than you are to do them. It is noteworthy from a jurisprudential perspective that the European Court of Human Rights has on 3 occasions, the Grand Chamber, so not just one of the chambers, but the Grand Chamber, which is a composition of 17 judges, and they make definitive law, has said that church autonomy must be respected and that the state can't interfere with the internal workings of a church. And so when you are dictating what can and can't be done during a worship service, to me, that is interfering with the internal workings of a church.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And maybe just a final point here. Sue Berry, I'm not quite sure where you're talking from. So we were saying that the no singing comes under the should not, so it's not necessarily legally binding, but you make the point about the mask wearing. Obviously, in England, mask wearing seems to be mandated in sort of public areas or indoors. Rob, does the mask wearing apply to churches as well?
The mask wearing applies to churches in England and Scotland. The real confusion with the regulations is that they're devolved powers, and each part of the UK has gradually eased the restrictions on churches in different ways, or reimposed them, as the case may be. So at the beginning of August, the government introduced an absolute must for wearing face masks in churches in England. The Scottish Assembly already had that in place, I believe. In Northern Ireland and Wales, it isn't a requirement to wear a face mask in church. So you have to, if you're running a church in different parts of the UK, you need to familiarise yourself as far as possible with the regulations that apply to you, because they are different.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's
it's just all the credit in the world to Rob, because these the guidance is a moving target. It changes all the time. So he's been on top of this, and I haven't seen anyone else on top of this. So well done, Rob.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rob. And if anyone has more questions, or if you're a church leader and you need some advice, do please feel free to reach out to us at the Christian Legal Centre. You can find out more about us at www.christianconcern.com, and we'd always be very happy. I'm sure, well, Roger and Rob, I'm sure would be always very happy to answer your questions, whatever they may be. But yes, do check out Rob's article, which was published this week, on is it safe to restart church services. So if we just move on now, the question of euthanasia has come up again, the question of assisted suicide and assisted dying. Andrew Mitchell MP, who sits on the committee sort of overseeing the review of our assisted suicide laws, recently said that he believes there's going to be changes made to the euthanasia laws in England within the next 4 years, and has kind of come out as pro euthanasia, pro assisted suicide laws. And this is an issue that we've been fighting against for a long time. There's been many challenges over the last few years, and Care Not Killing have been very big in speaking out against changing the laws that we currently have. Roger, why is euthanasia such an important issue for Christians to speak against?
Well, first of all, euthanasia is a litmus test for a culture. And I think one of the philosophical underpinnings of it is this utilitarian sense that life is only worth living so long as you can get pleasure from it. So as a society, we've kind of lost this idea that suffering could be holy and sanctifying. We've forgotten that life is sacred from the moment of conception until natural death. And the reality is, in every single jurisdiction that assisted suicide or euthanasia has been legislated in, it has gone from something somewhat regulated to something absolutely no longer regulated. We've seen that in the Netherlands, where people are getting euthanized now for depression, not for any illness. We've seen it in Belgium, where you're allowed as a child to have assisted suicide. You're not allowed to drive, vote, drink, but you're allowed to have assisted suicide. In Switzerland, when it was introduced, within 5 years, it had risen. Instances of assisted suicide rose 700%. So it quickly becomes unregulated. And in the Netherlands, I think 1% of the population, which is a significant amount, dies every year through euthanasia. And these are folks who, if as a society we showed more caring, better bedside manner, made people feel like they were worth it. Studies show, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, their study shows that an overwhelming, I think it's a 98% of those people would want to live, that their desire to die is a feeling of worthlessness and not being wanted in society anymore.
Yeah, no, it's a sad situation. I mean, I'll just pick up on one of those points you're making about. So just this last week, Belgian activist Amy de Schutter, who's in her 30s, physically healthy, 3 doctors have agreed that she should have the right to die because of her mental health. She has autism and depression, which she's considered unbearable. And she's suffered, she says, extreme traumas from childhood, started experiencing depression at age 11 or 12, and has had multiple suicide attempts in her life. And I think, yeah, this message, you make a really interesting point there about the litmus test, about what the culture is saying. It's a culture of death, you know, and if we're saying that some people, we shouldn't stop from committing suicide, I think too often the restrictions get narrowed. We think this is only an issue about end of life care, someone who's in lots of pain, lots of difficulty, and it's just allowing them to sort of die without all of that pain. But we're seeing all this kind of slippery slope into what it leads to. And you're saying there that utilitarian approach to life, where it's only worth living if you want to, you know, if it has that kind of value. And I guess
what you're saying is natural death versus an unnatural death. So obviously the latter is something that Christians are opposed to, and they've got this image of a velvet pillow, you know, death, where you're laying on your soft velvet pillow surrounded by loved ones and you go peacefully. And that's not the reality of euthanasia at all. You're usually there alone. There are often complications with the drugs being used, and it can be a very painful death as well. So I don't know where this image has come from, but it's not a real one.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I think one of the questions maybe, I guess, for us is, at the end of life, more investment maybe needs to be made in palliative care. And if we introduce euthanasia, perhaps it will be seen as a medical option, a treatment option, as opposed to these other more costly issues. How do you think, Rob, maybe we as a culture can show that we value life and value the elderly, perhaps through palliative care, or really through just support and community?
Well, picking back up on what you said a little while ago about Andrew Mitchell's comments and him saying that within the next 4 years, he thinks this is going to be a reality. I think that shows an enormous amount of hubris on his part, because he seems to be rather second guessing what's going to happen in Parliament and the fact that an act of that nature would pass. But one of the problems that you also have is you've got the people on the ground, the clinicians, who are going to be responsible for doing all of this. Now, it's some while since clinicians have had to sign the Hippocratic Oath. My wife qualified as a doctor in, I think, 1988, and even then the Hippocratic Oath had gone. But nevertheless, you swore some sort of oath, which meant that you were to do no harm to the patient. You're always expected to act in the patient's good. Now, I can see palliative care being in the patient's good, but this alternative, I think you're going to find an awful lot of doctors who will simply refuse because it's not in the patient's best interests. And that should also have been the case with the Belgian example that you cited. They should be treating the underlying problem of this young woman, her mental health problems, not saying, okay, well, we give up on those, so we'll let you die. That's an entirely defeatist and that's bad medicine. It's really bad medicine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess you make there about, you know, we think doctors might not be willing to do that, but I guess in countries in Scandinavia, in Canada, doctors have been willing to do this, and I guess there's been times we've been involved in the recent Abbasi case, in the Alfie Evans case, where the doctors have decided themselves that actually ending life, albeit through sort of pseudo quasi-natural means, ending life is the best treatment option. So I think this kind of ties in, I guess, in the culture. If there's a culture of death with doctors in the healthcare system, then will we expect a push in palliative care, for example? Roger, how do you think these kinds of issues fit together? Maybe, for example, this Abbasi case, but tied in with the issue of, what is best for patients?
Yeah, I would just say, first of all, that each doctor brings their own worldview to the table, and so some are willing, some are unwilling. I think of a case that I was involved with in Belgium that's currently at the European Court of Human Rights, where I met this gentleman, Tom Mortier, whose mother had been euthanized, and it was for depression because she broke up with her boyfriend. So she had to go to 3 different doctors who refused her, and she finally found a 4th doctor who was a euthanasia activist, and she donated 2,000 euros to his association, and voila, she was euthanized, and her son was only told the day after. So it is a system ripe for abuse. What's happening in the UK, I think you've mentioned several of the cases, Alfie Evans. There was a more recent case where a young man in his 20s or early 30s, I can't recall which, simply because he didn't want to live with a colostomy bag, had signed a previous order saying he didn't want to be resuscitated, changed his mind in coming to the hospital, and the court actually overrode that while he was unconscious. So there's this sense that judges and doctors are making. I mean, first of all, doctors are in a position where they're seeing death and dying and suffering all day long. So their worldview might be a little cold on these issues. They're not seeing a positive light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of the patients, and they're being harsh with parents and loved ones who do. And I think the parent or the loved one, if there's any hope, should be allowed to make that decision. But it is a matter of philosophy. If your view is that life is only worth living so long as you can gain pleasure from it, then you're going to tend to lean in the way of euthanasia.
Yeah. So I guess the main objection, it comes down to, I guess, if we do restrict it to end of life, those who are older, who are in pain, I guess the objection would be, well, how can we stop them? How can we not let them, just die, slip away easily when they're in so much pain? John Winlow there suggests, why can there not be a panel of involved doctors or loved one to be allowed to slip away peacefully? Aren't we being mean by saying that should not be allowed? I guess either of you could answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, and Rob can follow if he has something, that again, there's a difference between natural death and unnatural death. Yeah. And so starving or dehydrating someone to death is an unnatural death, and it is a way that courts have been ending life in the UK for some time. Whereas not using life-saving procedures like ventilator or things artificially keeping someone alive, removing that is a natural death.
Yeah.
So it is a key distinction.
Yeah.
I've heard Dr. Peter Saunders speak on this subject on a number of occasions, and he is very clear that done properly, palliative care can cover an awful lot of the problems associated with long protracted unpleasant deaths. But I completely agree with Roger. There's a distinct difference between life-sustaining treatment, things keeping somebody alive for the sake of it and letting them drift away gently, or intervening to bring about death. They're two very, very different things. And I would completely support somebody's right to not be kept alive, but equally I would be very, very loath to give the right for somebody to have their life ended.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people that, they hear a story of a particularly difficult case, but those are often the minority. And I think if we were to invest much more so in palliative care, this would really change that culture. And I guess, as we say, it is that culture of life. And in fact, Dr. Peter Saunders does say that, he says the generation that killed their children will be killed by their children. And we're entering into a kind of population demographic crisis in the next 50 years because we haven't, in the West, because there haven't been enough children being born, that there's actually going to be a huge upside down dependency where there's going to be so many people who are elderly being looked after by not enough people who are of working age, that the pressure on the elderly to die is going to be even stronger going forward. And you hear these horrible stories. I think the main reasons why people, some of the key reasons why people say that they wanted to die. So in Canada, for example, 5,631 Canadians chose medical assisted in dying. Of those, more than 1/3 said they were worried about being a burden to their families, and many others, 13.7%, said that isolation and loneliness were the key factors for them. And so really, the majority of these assisted suicides, these euthanasia cases, are more social than necessarily medical. And of course, I am in full agreement with you about that distinction between natural and unnatural dying and what is effectively suicide. I think words are hugely important there, but this social, cultural issue of isolation, of loneliness, about being seen as a burden, is really what's driving the demand for suicide, demand for assisted suicide, for euthanasia. And yeah, the words are hugely important. They try and reframe it as assisted dying rather than assisted suicide. You know, and a question we guess we need to ask ourselves is, should we stop some people from committing suicide or not? You know, we talk about the need to invest in mental health, and no few people here have been talking about mental health in the comments. Sue Berry, mental health is consistently underfunded. It's a reality where I live. Thank you for posting that. We don't treat mental health through suicide. We always talk about how lamentable, how horrific, how heartbreaking suicide is. Why would we want to go in that direction? And I think this is an area really that the church needs to speak into. So how do you think, Roger, that you think the church can really speak into this?
Well, you look at Acts of the Apostles, and one of the first things that was done was they set up a social system where the widows were being taken care of, those who were needy were being taken care of. So they recognized the emotion, that there was a necessity to take care of the physical and emotional well-being of the vulnerable in society. And I think church plays a role in that. And to kind of rewind back to the beginning of this conversation that we've been having today, that stops when you've closed churches. And so again, it ties in. We need an active church, a church that does outreach, and we need people to see that life is worth living, that there's a lot of joy. Not necessarily, there's a difference between joy and happiness, spiritually speaking, and we need to focus on knowing what joy is as opposed to the Hollywood type of happiness, and finding that even long suffering could lead to hope, which can lead to love and faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just moving on to a kind of final story, it's kind of a bizarre and strange story that happened. I think it was Tuesday this week, in celebration of Pride. A train painted in the Pride flags. It was a kind of a gay Pride train. A gay train was going from London Euston to Manchester Piccadilly, and it was entirely staffed by people from the LGBT community. Lots of people were saying that this is discrimination. I think the staff were volunteers in a sense as well. But why are they doing this? And in fact, there was some backlash from people within the LGBT community who are saying, we just want to get on with our lives. Stop kind of painting us as this kind of special group that needs all this kinds of things going on. What would we maybe say in response to this? Is that discrimination? Is this something we want to be seeing in our train system? Presumably not. Roger, what do you think?
I want my own train. No, I mean, I think, it reminds me of a meeting I had not too long ago at the Department for Education in Westminster, where there was no flag up, there was no other symbol up except a two-story pride flag. And when a society focuses so much on certain symbolism, it shows where the heart of that society is at and what they're worshiping. And I think this disproportionate inclusivity push is unfortunate, because it's telling us that not all people are equal. That some people are more equal than others, and that's the tragic flaw of equality law. It's tribalistic. It doesn't bring people together. It sets them into different categories. You're a victim. You're a victimizer, and those aren't real, because we're all people at the end of the day, and we feel and treat people differently. But at the end of the day, we're all God's creatures.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rob, how would you respond?
I'm afraid I just thought that was one of the most flagrant publicity stunts I've ever seen. The train operator did it for no other reason than to get some column inches, and it succeeded. And the fact that we're talking about it probably just gives it more air than it actually deserves.
Yeah, possibly so. When I saw it on Tuesday, I was thinking, I only read about it a bit too late, and I was like, this would have been a good thing for us to sort of do a Christian Concern staff trip out to get on the train and see how it is. But yes, I guess there's a real sadness about the fact that there is this push, there is this, this has become an identity, and that's the core of who we are. That's the definition of who we are, and that's why it needs to be celebrated. That's why it needs to kind of be pushed into everyone's kind of faces. And they kind of say, we just want to get on with our lives. And I think what we're seeing is it's all been overdone and over pushed. And I guess really at the heart of all of that really is just a longing to be accepted and a longing to just be affirmed as who they are. But they're seeking that in the wrong identity. They're seeking that in the wrong places. And they're being affirmed in a false identity about who they are. And Roger, as you're saying, we're all made in the image of God, but we're made male and female. And when we build our lives on anything other than that, it's only ever going to lead to destruction. When we absolutize one little part of who we are, we absolutize a feeling that we have, and we let everything revolve around that, then it becomes everything, and we have to keep fighting. And it's really a hopeless life, because there will never be that joy. There will never be true peace. There will never be true justice. But we do know that perfect justice will come, has come in Jesus Christ, and perfect peace comes through him. Even though, yes, as Christians, we do wrestle with issues, we still wrestle with problems, we can trust and cling on to him, knowing that he will hold us, that he is our rock, even when times are hard. Although, having said that, yes, I agree, Roger, I would like to see a Christian train running with Christian staff, and what an opportunity for evangelism there. But yes, it's a difficult one, and they're a community that we as the church need to speak to, need to witness to, and need to point them towards Jesus Christ and the cross, who died for our sins, and who welcomes us, forgives us for our sins, but calls us to holiness and discipleship, to pick up our cross and follow him. Well, thank you all so much for joining. It's been so great having you with us. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Roger. Coming up on the 7th of September is our next Gospel Issues seminar with Dr. Peter Jones, looking about how does our worldview shape our society. And particularly looking at the areas of paganism and sexuality, I think, and he's a real expert on these issues from a Christian perspective. So please do go and check that out, and do consider signing up to our Christian Weekly News, sending out all the information and news, the key issues facing Christians today, updates on what's going on, updates on the cases that we're working on as well. So really do consider signing up to that. You'll get it this evening. We send out a weekly email on Fridays, which is really great and helpful and useful. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Roger. It's been great to have you with us. Your insights are always so helpful and fruitful, and it's been great being with you today. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.